Why do some people only feel powerful when they make others feel small? The morning it started, the sky was still a dull purple, the kind of quiet Texas morning that usually promised peace. But peace wasn't on the schedule. Not that day. Not for me. I just stepped outside with my coffee and my keys, the sun barely warming the horizon, ready to check on the cattle and start the simple life I'd fought to build. That's when I saw it. Gleaming like a misplaced jewel from another world. A blue Rolls-Royce parked sideways, blocking my only driveway. It looked more like a sculpture than a car. And in front of it, a woman in heels. Composed, radiant, and unmistakably smug. She didn't flinch when she saw me. Just smiled like she was greeting an old friend. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she said, eyes cold despite the honey in her voice. I got completely lost. But lost people don't park with mathematical precision. They don't linger for 20 minutes studying the layout of your property. They don't ask how many cattle you own or how often you use your dump truck. That was the first time I met Clarissa Davidson, HOA president, queen of Sunset Hills. And apparently the kind of neighbor who doesn't knock. She conquers. I tried to play nice. Tried to keep my cool as I stood there with my keys in hand, 2 hours behind schedule, while my cattle bellowed. Restlessly. But something about the way she sat in that car, sipping her coffee and watching me through the rear view, gave me a feeling I hadn't felt since my old construction site days. The feeling right before something explodes. She didn't leave. Not really. Not in her mind. And certainly not in spirit. Because the next morning at 6 a.m., she was back. Same car, same smirk, same perfect position. No excuse this time, no pretense. She was waiting for a friend, she said. Just enjoying the morning air. My cattle hadn't eaten, my truck couldn't move. My ranch, which I'd bought with 15 years of hard labor and sacrifice, was being slowly choked by a woman with a thermos and a grudge. Each day was worse than the last. At first I thought it was harassment. Then I realized it was war. Betty Clark, my neighbor and guardian angel in a sun hat, came by with the missing pieces. Clarissa had once owned a ranch. 10 years ago, burned to the ground, husband left, bank account emptied. Pride gone up in smoke. She blamed ranchers for that fire, claimed it started next door, said we were careless, reckless, dangerous. But the truth, the real truth, was even uglier. The fire started in her own generator, her own negligence, her own shortcuts, her own shame. But facts don't matter when you've got a luxury car, a rich second husband, and a title with president in it. Clarissa didn't just want to forget her past. She wanted to erase it. And I was a living reminder of what she'd lost. She parked across my driveway 47 times. She documented my cattle, filmed my routine, held HOA meetings on the side of the road with signs that read, "Protect our children," as if cows had suddenly become a threat to humanity. She didn't want me to move. She wanted me to break. I adjusted. Woke earlier, tried side routes, built temporary feeding pens. But the more I adapted, the more she escalated. The pressure wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Clarissa Davidson weaponized community, gossip like a military-grade tool, staged health walks, told neighbors my truck was a traffic hazard. She coached kids to cough when they walked past my land. Parents started whispering about air quality. Flyers went out warning of agricultural pollution. She didn't just attack my livelihood, she rewrote my story, turned me from a TI rancher into a villain. And then she crossed the line. Her blockade stopped me from reaching Bessie, my oldest cow and very pregnant, when she went into distress. I begged, on my knees, gravel cutting through my jeans, voice shaking. Please, I said, I need to get her to a vet. She's going to die. Clarissa took a slow sip of her latte and rolled up her window. Bessie died 50 yards from where Clarissa sat, smiling in her climate-controlled palace on wheels. And something inside me shattered. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch with the moonlight bouncing off the hood of my old dump truck, the same one I'd used to build this life. The one Clarissa always scoffed at. The one she hated. Almost as much as she hated the smell of hay and the sound of freedom. By morning, I knew what I had to do. And this time, I wouldn't be asking nicely. The diesel engine thundered to life at 6:05 a.m. It was louder than usual. Or maybe my blood was just too loud in my ears to tell the difference. Clarissa had arrived alone this time. No signs, no followers, no HOA cheer squad. Just her. Just the Rolls-Royce. Just the confident posture of someone who had gotten away with it all for far too long. She was already sipping her coffee, parked perfectly across my driveway like a predator nesting in its favorite hunting spot. She didn't see me yet. Not until I walked to the dump truck. Not until I climbed inside. Not until I slammed the door and the 40-ton monster came alive beneath me like a sleeping dragon stirred. Her head turned. Eyes lifted from the pages of her book. The air shifted. She'd gotten used to this sound over the past few weeks. The rumble of my dump truck warming up, always followed by my footsteps, my voice, my pleading. She didn't expect anything different. Not today, not ever. She went back to her coffee. But today I didn't approach her window. Today I didn't knock. I dropped the truck into gear and rolled forward. At 5 miles per hour, it felt like an eternity. 50 feet of gravel crunched beneath me like dry bone. Every inch that passed brought me closer to that symbol of power, her gleaming blue lie on wheels. At 30 feet, she looked up again. Her brow furrowed. She tilted her head slightly, almost puzzled. At 20 feet, her eyes widened. She sat up straighter. At 10 feet, she moved. Fast. She threw the door open and scrambled out, her heel catching the curb as she stumbled to the side. Hands raised like I was wielding a weapon and not just consequences. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her voice cracking for the first time I'd ever heard. "You can't... Are you out of your mind?" I didn't stop, didn't answer, didn't blink. I just stared straight ahead, a freight train of fury masked in calm. The dump truck met the Rolls-Royce with a metallic crunch so loud it seemed to rip through the air itself. A scream of bending. Steel. Glass shattering. Luxury crushed under legacy. Every inch the truck rolled forward, it flattened another layer of her arrogance, her illusion of control. Her kingdom crumbled beneath the weight of something built, not bought. It took 27 seconds, that's all. Less than half a minute to erase the monument she'd parked in front of me like a threat every day. I reversed slowly. The wreckage groaned as the truck backed away, revealing the mangled corpse of her pride. The Rolls was no longer a car, just a twisted heap of chrome, leather, and shattered glass. Clarissa stood on the sidewalk, hands shaking, face pale, eyes locked on the destruction. "You're insane," she whispered, then screamed louder. "You'll go to prison for this. I'll sue you for everything you own." Her threats felt thin now, desperate paper darts thrown against concrete. I climbed down from the cab, my boots landing hard on the ground, and walked to the crushed Rolls. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I just stared at what was left of her weapon. "You killed my cow," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone. "You tried to kill everything I've built. Every day you pushed. Smiled while you did it." I turned and finally looked at her. Her voice shook. "You've lost everything." I shook my head slowly. "Not yet, but you just did." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It rang with judgment. Not from me, from the neighbors who'd heard the crash and were now slowly stepping outside. Doors creaked open, curtains twitched, and then Betty. She marched across the street in her slippers, robe flapping, eyes wide as she took in the wreckage, then the look on Clarissa's face. And then she laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but like someone finally exhaling after holding their breath for too long. "Well, I'll be," she said with a slow smile. "Guess karma drives a dump truck." Clarissa spun on her like a wasp stung. "You're encouraging this?" "He destroyed my car! This is criminal!" But Betty wasn't listening to her. She was looking around at the neighbors who had gathered. And she said something I'll never forget. "Raise your hand if Clarissa's ever made your life harder." Hands went up, one by one. First, Mrs. Johnson, who'd been forced to remove her backyard garden because Clarissa said tomatoes were an eyesore. Then Mr. Peterson, whose teenage son had his car towed because Clarissa didn't like the paint color. Then the Millers, who'd gotten fined for wind chimes. Then the Holloways, who were warned about their daughter's lemonade stand. Hands, hands, hands. Clarissa turned in circles, her mouth hanging open. "You're all just going to side with him? He committed a felony." "No," Betty said, her voice like gravel. "He reminded you that you're not above consequences." When the police showed up, Officer Thompson, who'd been patrolling these roads longer than Clarissa had been married, he took one look at the wreckage, one look at the crowd, and one long sigh. "Let me guess," he muttered. "Peaceful assembly?" Clarissa launched into a speech about harassment and danger and destruction. She waved her arms, demanded an arrest, recited statutes. But Thompson turned to me. "Mr. Bennett," he said slowly, "can you tell me what happened?" I nodded. "She's been blocking my driveway for weeks. Organized protests, kept me from feeding my cattle. One died because I couldn't get her to a vet. Today, I just couldn't take it anymore." A pause. Then Betty stepped forward. "I saw it. We all did. That woman's been harassing him for weeks." Thompson turned to the crowd. "That true?" A chorus of yeses, nods. A few cell phones raised with videos already being sent his way. Clarissa's voice dropped to a hiss. "You're not seriously—" "I'm seriously considering that maybe this wasn't destruction," he said. "Maybe it was desperation." He turned back to me. "You're gonna have to pay for the car, and you'll attend anger management. But this ends now. No more blocking, no more protests, no more games." Clarissa looked like she'd been slapped. "You're protecting him." "No," he said. "I'm protecting the rest of us from what happens when people like you think the rules don't apply." The crowd stayed long after she left. Some to help clean up, some just to talk, and some to apologize. Turns out she'd ruled the HOA like a queen for too long. And while many had been too scared to speak, the crushed Rolls-Royce had cracked the spell. That afternoon, the county petition to have my ranch declared a public nuisance began to fall apart. 12 people withdrew their signatures in a single day. By the end of the week, More than 60 new ones supported my right to operate. The county hearing, once scheduled to be my public execution, became Clarissa's reckoning. Story after story came out. The Martinez family. The garden incident. The war against Christmas decorations. Clarissa Davidson wasn't a leader. She was a tyrant. Within a month, she'd been removed as HOA president. Within 6, she'd sold her mansion and moved out of Sunset Hills. In a used sedan, no longer insured for harassment-related accidents. They say her husband looked tired when he left. They say she looked angry. But me? I stayed. I kept my ranch. I rebuilt. And every morning, when I walk past the gravel where her car used to block my freedom, I remember what it cost to stand up for something that mattered. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about a life. Mine. And the right to live it without someone else deciding you don't belong. It's a strange thing, the silence that follows a storm. Not quiet. Silence. That unnatural stillness, the kind that lingers after something inside you has been torn down and rebuilt differently. That's what the week after the dump truck felt like. Not victory, not peace, just silence. Clarissa was gone. Temporarily, at first. Her husband came by 3 days after the incident to retrieve what he could from the wreckage. He didn't say much, didn't threaten lawsuits or wave papers, just stared at the twisted hunk of what used to be a status symbol, sighed and said, "She's at her sister's place. Probably for a while." Betty said that was code for, "They're calling the lawyers." But no lawsuit came, not right away. Instead, the silence stretched, and in that space, something strange started to happen. Neighbors who had once avoided me, who'd pulled their kids close and crossed the street when they saw my boots hit gravel, now waved. Some even stopped by. They brought pies, homemade casseroles, jars of sweet tea with apologies on their labels. One man I'd never spoken to, a young father named Devin, brought his son over. "Hey," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "My boy wanted to see the cows, said he heard they were brave." I didn't know what to say to that. Brave cows. But I let the kid feed one of the calves, and when he smiled so wide I thought his face might break, I felt something thaw inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. The dump truck, still running strong, still caked in dust and pride, became something of a legend. Folks came by just to see it. A few asked to take pictures with it. A few more brought stories. And that's when I realized Clarissa hadn't just been harassing me, she'd been running a dictatorship. It was Mrs. Ellison who told me about the surveillance drones. "Little things," she said, sipping lemonade on my porch like we'd been friends forever. Barely bigger than birds. She used to fly them over people's yards to check for violations, claimed it was for security. Truth is, she just liked spying. Then came the story about the Halloween decorations, a family down the block who'd been fined $400 for putting up skeletons 2 days before October, and the wedding fiasco. Clarissa had filed an HOA citation because the bride wore cowboy boots. The stories poured in, and with each one I realized I'd never been the only one suffering. I'd just been the only one to push back. And maybe that was what finally broke the silence. Because that week, something changed in Sunset Hills. People started gathering, not in protest, not in anger, but in community. Real community. Kids who'd been coached to cough in front of my pasture now waved when they rode their bikes past. Someone hung a handmade sign on my fence. Support local ranchers. Caleb feeds us all. The HOA board, now without its tyrant, scrambled to do damage control. They hosted a listening meeting, thinking maybe they could win back the trust Clarissa had torched. Only a dozen people showed up. Betty said they spent the whole meeting trying to pretend they hadn't known what she'd been doing. They did, she told me, sharp and bitter. They just liked having a bulldog to enforce the rules they were too cowardly to admit they enjoyed. The petition? Dead county hearing? Canceled. The noise complaints disappeared like smoke in a storm. Even the agricultural inspector, who finally came out to follow up on the anonymous complaints, ended up staying for coffee and beef jerky. He walked the land, patted my cows, looked at the barn I'd restored myself, and said, "Hell, this is cleaner than my own garage." He wrote me the cleanest report a ranch could hope for, and that should have been the end of it. But trauma doesn't leave quietly. Sometimes it lingers in the smallest places. In the way I flinched at every car that slowed near my driveway. In the way my hands curled into fists when I saw a clipboard. In the nightmares where Bessie still lay there, breathing heavy, waiting for help that never came. I carried her death with me every day. Not because I could have done more, but because I hadn't been able to save her, and that kind of helplessness doesn't wash off. People kept asking why I hadn't gotten revenge sooner, why I hadn't crushed the car on day one, why I'd tolerated so much for so long. And the truth is, I don't know. Maybe part of me hoped she'd stop. Maybe part of me thought I could be the better man. But mostly, I think I was afraid. Afraid of becoming like her. Afraid that if I pushed back, I'd lose more than cattle. I'd lose myself. Turns out, there's a fine line between defending what's yours and becoming the monster at the gate. The key is knowing why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. The week after Clarissa's departure, I spent a lot of time alone, even with the support, even with the new friendships, even with the dump truck legend growing by the day. Because I had to figure out what came next. Not just for the ranch, but for me. I started small. Fixed the fence she said was dangerous. Repainted the barn. Built a shaded pen where Bessie used to rest. Not because I needed it, but because it felt right. Then I put up a sign. Just a simple wooden board. Hand-painted in red. Bessie's Field. In memory of the gentle. It wasn't for her, really. It was for me, and for everyone who ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty dressed as civility. I hosted a little open house that weekend. Let the neighbors bring their kids, meet the animals, see for themselves. That this wasn't some industrial operation poisoning their air, just one man with a dream, a few cows, and the will to start over. People came. They brought food, laughter, stories. One little girl drew me a picture of my dump truck crushing. A blue scribble labeled "mean car." She gave it to me with a grin, missing 2 front teeth, and said, "This is how you save the farm." I still have that drawing on my fridge. That night, as the sun went down and the cows settled into quiet, I stood on my porch and breathed. Deep, full, uninterrupted. The ranch was still mine. The sky was still wide, and for the first time in weeks, the road was empty. No Rolls-Royce, no clipboard army, just dust. And the hum of a life I refused to let anyone steal. Some mornings feel like the first page of a new chapter, even when you're not sure what the story is yet. That's how the Sunday after the open house felt. The sun broke wide and golden over the pasture, my cattle grazed in calm rhythm, and the porch smelled like fresh coffee and cedar oil. The last of the protest signs had been pulled from the ditch. A few still lingered in the minds of the neighbors, maybe, but physically, they were gone. Clarissa's kingdom had fallen, but even kingdoms cast long shadows. Betty showed up around noon with her usual basket of blueberry muffins and town gossip. She sold the house, she said before she even sat down. Packed it all up in silence. Movers came Friday night, late, like she didn't want to be seen. "She's gone?" I asked. "For now," Betty said. "But people like her don't stay quiet forever. They lie in wait. Then they find new battlegrounds." I wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But I knew better than to think peace meant safety. So I kept working, kept moving, because building something real, something honest, means never letting your guard down completely. Not in a world where power hides behind manicured hedges and HOA bylaws. The days grew cooler. Autumn came soft and steady, and with it came the unexpected. Connection. The Petersons, who used to close their blinds when my truck started, invited me to dinner. Devin and his son started stopping by twice a week just to check on the cows. Even the HOA board, now sheepish and scattered, sent a letter formally apologizing for the role they'd played in amplifying tensions. I didn't need the apology, but I saved the letter. Some things are worth keeping, if only as proof that standing your ground changes more than just the outcome. It changes people. Still, something lingered. It showed up in small ways. A drone buzzing overhead one afternoon, just high enough to pretend it wasn't watching. A black SUV idling at the end of the road, engine humming like it knew it didn't. Belong a phone call that came with no voice, just static and a hang-up. Then, the letter. It arrived without a return address. Postmarked from Austin. Heavy envelope. Thick stock paper. I opened it with hands that already knew it wouldn't be good. Inside was a single sheet. Typed, precise, professional. Notice of civil litigation intent. Davidson vs. Bennett. The air around me stopped moving. The words blurred, then cleared again. The letter wasn't a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a warning. A threat dressed in legal formality. It detailed intent to recover damages for destruction of private property, emotional distress, defamation, and loss of community standing. Community standing? As if that hadn't crumbled the second her car did. I sat down hard on the steps, the letter in my hand, the earth suddenly unstable beneath my boots. Betty found me an hour later still staring at the page. She didn't need to ask. She saw it in my eyes. "She's not done," I said quietly. "No," Betty replied, "but neither are you." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared of losing the ranch, but because I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Clarissa didn't care about money, or justice, or even revenge. She cared about the story, her story. The one where she was always the victim and the rest of us, especially people like me, were the villains. If she couldn't win by community pressure, she'd rewrite the ending in court. That's when I knew. This wasn't about me. It never had been. This was about power, control, narrative. The next morning, I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, someone who specialized in HOA litigation and landowner disputes. A former rancher now wearing a suit instead of spurs. Her name was Rachel, and she didn't blink when I showed her the letter. "She's bluffing," she said after 10 seconds. "She's hoping you'll settle out of fear." What if I don't? I asked. Rachel smiled. Then we win. It wasn't bravado. It was experience. She'd seen it before. Dozens of cases where HOA leaders overstepped, lied, manufactured violations, and tried to weaponize civility. They hate being embarrassed, she told me. They'd rather spend $20,000 on a lawsuit than admit they lost control. So we prepared. We gathered video testimonies. The veterinary report from the day Bessie died. The footage of Clarissa's protests. Her signs. The kids coughing on cue. Neighbors signed statements. Even Officer Thompson provided a report, stating in his words that Mrs. Davidson engaged in a sustained pattern of harassment, obstruction, and manipulation that directly contributed to escalating tensions. It wasn't just a defense, it was a counterattack. And when the official court summons finally came, thick packet, stamped with all the seriousness money could buy, I didn't flinch, because I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was fighting for every person who'd ever been backed into a corner by someone who thought their title made them untouchable. The first court date was scheduled for late November. I showed up in boots polished to a dull shine, jeans clean, button-up shirt tucked. Rachel stood beside me like a steel fence. Clarissa showed up with 2 lawyers and a scowl that could curdle milk. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge the crowd of neighbors who had come just to watch, and, oh, there were neighbors, at least 15 of them, seated quietly, hands folded, eyes wide. One even wore a shirt that said, "I break for cows." The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics, read through the paperwork. Clarissa's lawyers tried to paint me as volatile, unhinged, dangerous. They described the dump truck like it was a loaded weapon. They brought up every stereotype about ranchers they could find: reckless, unregulated, resistant to authority. Then Rachel stood up. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show emotion. She just read through the timeline, played videos, quoted neighbors, outlined the systematic harassment, the deliberate blockade of an active ranch, the death of Bessie, the cruelty, the indifference, the psychological campaign to push someone off their legally owned land, not through violence, but manipulation. When it was over, the judge didn't say much, just leaned forward and said, "This case doesn't belong in civil court. It belongs in the trash." Clarissa's mouth dropped open, but the judge wasn't done. She turned to Clarissa's attorneys. "If your client files anything further without new legitimate evidence, I will consider sanctions for frivolous litigation. Do I make myself clear?" They nodded. She turned to me. "Mr. Bennett, while your response to the situation was unconventional, the court understands context. Case dismissed. You're free to go." The room erupted, not in cheers but in breath. One collective exhale from a neighborhood that had been holding it in too long. Outside, reporters were waiting. Clarissa pushed past them, head down, sunglasses on. I didn't speak to them, didn't pose, just walked back to my truck, not the dump one, just my regular workhorse, and drove home. The battle was over. The war had been won. But I knew deep down that people like Clarissa never really disappear. They just find new neighborhoods, new board positions, new targets. But not here. Not anymore. Because here, in this stretch of land and sky, people remembered. And if memory means anything, it means safety. That night, I sat on my porch, boots up, coffee in hand, watching the moon rise over Bessie's field. The cows were quiet. The road was empty, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next attack. I just felt still. whole, free. You don't realize how loud a lie can be until it finally goes quiet. The weeks after the court case felt different, not just in the neighborhood, but in me. There was no celebration, no victory parade, just something deeper, quieter, more lasting respect, not the kind you demand, not the kind you buy, the kind you earn, in diesel smoke and silence. Clarissa was gone, truly gone this time. Sold the house. Moved out overnight, like someone fleeing a crime scene. Word was her husband had taken a job in Arizona. Betty said it wasn't a job. It was an escape. The mansion sat empty for a while. Then a for sale sign appeared, followed by a long silence that made the cul-de-sac feel less like Sunset Hills and more like a ghost town. Turns out, people don't line up to buy the house where the HOA president lost a war with a dump truck. But I wasn't thinking about Clarissa anymore. I had a ranch to run, a field to maintain, and a herd that needed more than my time. They needed my full presence again. The grief over Bessie hadn't left me. It had just found a place to live. A quiet place in the back of my chest that throbbed whenever I passed her pen. Now empty, now sacred. I started spending more time there, sometimes just leaning on the fence and breathing, letting the stillness settle in. It's strange how loss becomes routine. Not easier, just familiar. But healing has a rhythm too. It showed up in the small things. A calf born without complications. The Petersons bringing over a homemade gate they'd built just because. A new neighbor stopping by with a cup of coffee and a nervous smile saying, "I heard about what happened, and I just wanted to say thanks for not giving up." And then there was the letter. This time, not from a lawyer. Not from an HOA board. It was handwritten. On floral stationery. Dear Mr. Bennett, my name is Lisa. I'm 11. My dad says I shouldn't write to strangers, but you're not a stranger to me. I saw what you did to save your ranch, and I think you're very brave. I want to be brave too. Someday I want to have a ranch and help animals. You're my hero. Love, Lisa PPS. I drew you a picture of you and your cow. I hope you like it. Inside, the envelope was a drawing of me, my hat 10 times too big standing next to a smiling cow with a heart on its side. Above it, in big block letters, "Real cowboys don't quit." I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I pinned it next to the old permit I used to hang by the front door, the one I'd thought might get revoked. It never did. Turns out, the county not only refused Clarissa's nuisance petition, they sent a representative out to inspect the property themselves. He left after 20 minutes saying, "This isn't a ranch, it's a postcard." Things were changing. The local farmers market asked me to start selling direct. I added a roadside stand, eggs, honey, a little jerky, even a few jars of pickled okra. People came, they bought. They stayed to talk. Then the school called, the same elementary school where Clarissa once gave safety lectures about agricultural hazards. They wanted to bring the kids out on a field trip. Hands-on learning, the principal said. We'd like them to understand where their food really comes from. I almost laughed. Instead, I built a picnic area out by the back pasture. The kids came in 2 yellow buses. They spilled out in squeals and giggles and chaos. They petted cows, fed goats, asked endless questions, and didn't cough once. I told them about soil, about fencing, about what cows eat in winter, and I told them about Bessie. Not how she died, but how she lived, gentle, loyal, curious, the kind of creature who trusted first and never had to think twice. Afterward, a little boy came up and tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Bennett," he whispered, "can I be a rancher too?" I knelt down. "You already are." He grinned so hard he couldn't even say thank you. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the wind rustling through the pecan trees. Somewhere, out past the fence, the cattle were bedding down. A distant coyote howled once, then fell quiet. It hit me, slow and deep. This place, this life, it had survived something ugly, and it had come out the other side stronger, cleaner, more connected. Clarissa hadn't just tried to block my driveway. She'd tried to erase me, not with a gun, not with fire, with reputation. With whispers, with paperwork, the silent kind of violence, the kind too many people never fight back against, because it doesn't look like harm until it's already taken everything. But now there was a line in the dirt, a story in the gravel, a memory forged in crushed steel and courtroom silence. And I knew. It mattered. A few months later, a man stopped by, drove up in a dusty truck with a dog in the passenger seat. Looked like someone who worked with his hands and didn't apologize for it, you, Caleb? He asked, stepping out. I am. He shook my hand. Name's Howard. I've got a place about 30 miles west. Heard your story. I waited. He continued. HOA's trying to shut me down too. Said my fencing violates visual harmony standards. Got a petition going and everything. I nodded. I don't know what to do, he said, but I saw what you did, and it gave me hope. I looked him in the eye and said, then fight. His shoulders relaxed just a little. Think I will. He left with a promise to return for eggs. I knew he would, and I knew he wouldn't be the last. Clarissa thought she was ending something, but what she started, the resistance, the reckoning, the refusal to bow, that was just beginning. People were waking up, not to violence, not to revenge, to boundaries, to worth, to saying, no more, not here, not again. The dump truck, now affectionately known around town as Clarissa's Reckoning, sat parked beside the barn, tires cleaned, engine oiled, a little metal plate on the front bumper that read, sometimes, steel has to speak. I didn't drive it often anymore, but I kept it ready, just in case. Not because I wanted to use it again, but because I knew, in this world, tyrants don't disappear. They just move down the block. And sometimes, the only thing between them and your front door is the decision to stand tall, to say, this is my land, my life, my story, and no Rolls-Royce, no HOA, no smiling lie can take that away. Sometimes it takes one broken rule to remind people what freedom actually looks like. Winter came hard that year, the kind that makes your breath crack like glass in the air. But even in the cold, people kept showing up. Not to protest, not to complain, to learn, to listen, to talk. It started slow. One neighbor asking about how I handled manure management. Another dropping by with questions about irrigation. A young couple came with their toddler, just wanting to walk the fence line and feel what it was like to be around real animals. People who had once been afraid of the smell now said it felt like fresh air, and in the silence Clarissa left behind, something else started to grow. Curiosity, connection, courage. I didn't see it all at once. It happened in layers. Quiet changes in the people around me, a shift in tone, a new confidence in their step, a subtle refusal to be pushed anymore. And then, the letters started coming. Not bills, not threats. Letters from all over the state. a rancher in Fredericksburg, wrote, saying the HOA in his town was trying to ban his cattle guard because it was too rural for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. A goat farmer in Round Rock said they'd tried to have her shut down for violating picket fence continuity. A chicken keeper in Waco had been fined for nuisance clucking. Each of them wrote the same thing in different ways. I thought I was alone until I heard about you. They had heard. Somehow, word had spread. The news clip from the day of the dump truck, the courtroom photos, the quotes from Betty. That woman thought she could bury a working man in bureaucracy. Turns out he had a bigger shovel. They called me all kinds of things I never asked to be. Folk hero. Symbol. Reckoning. But I wasn't trying to lead anything. I was just trying to survive. Still, something was shifting. One afternoon, Betty came by, wind whipping her scarf like a flag, cheeks pink from the cold. She had that look in her eyes, the one that said she'd been talking to too many people at once. "Do you know what you started?" she asked, handing me a folded piece of paper. It was a flyer, Rural Rights Coalition, first state meeting, January 14th, Fort Worth below it, in bold keynote speaker. Caleb Bennett. I blinked. What the hell is this? Betty just grinned. Hope you like microphones. I didn't. But I went. Not because I wanted the spotlight, because I knew what it felt like to be cornered. And if someone else was standing where I had once stood, knuckles white on a steering wheel, watching a woman sip coffee while your life bled out behind her, then maybe my voice could hand them something stronger than sympathy. Maybe it could hand them a spine. The meeting was held in a fairground barn. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, people in denim and grit and worry lines. There were over 200 of them. Farmers, ranchers, mothers, veterans, teachers. One man had driven 4 hours just to sit in the back row and nod. Stood behind a podium that wobbled slightly and cleared my throat. I don't know how to make speeches, I started. So I'll just tell you what happened, and what I did, and why I don't regret it. And I told them about the driveway, the smirk, the cattle left hungry, the cow who died while people filmed it, the dump truck, the silence that followed. I told them about the courtroom, about how power isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, with paperwork, and how sometimes the only way to be heard is to make a sound too big to ignore. When I finished, nobody clapped right away. They stood, quiet, and then it started. Not applause, not cheers. A slow, steady knock of boots on concrete. Like thunder, like a storm that had been waiting too long to break. After that day, the letters didn't stop. They multiplied. People started tagging my ranch's name on social media. Someone started calling it the ranch that fought back. I didn't correct them. I just kept feeding the cows, fixing the fences, answering the door when folks showed up with questions. Because that was the thing about standing your ground. It turned your home into a lighthouse, one that other people could find when their own skies went dark. And then one morning, something happened that changed everything again. Young woman drove up in a rusted-out van. She had mud on her boots, a notebook in her hand, and the kind of fire in her eyes I hadn't seen since construction days on sites that almost fell apart. She stepped out, held her hand out, and said, "Mr. Bennett, I'm starting a legal co-op. Pro bono representation for rural families fighting HOA intimidation. I want to name it after your cow." I froze. "Bessie?" She nodded. "The Bessie Project," she said. Justice for the gentle. I didn't say anything for a long time, just looked out at the pasture where Bessie had once stood, where the grass now grew thick and healthy, touched only by sunlight and memory. You really think it'll help? I asked. She smiled. I think you already did. We're just catching up. She left with a jug of milk and a promise to return. And I stood there on the gravel, wind blowing cold across my face, and felt something strange. Pride. Not because I was a symbol, but because Bessie was. The next few months moved fast. The co-op launched. News stations picked up the story. Legislators started mentioning words like agricultural sovereignty and rural protection clauses. Some of it felt too big for me, too political, too complicated. But I knew this much. When people who were once silent start speaking, everything starts to shake. One day I got a call. Is this Caleb Bennett? Yes. This is Congressman Adler's office. The congressman would like to speak with you about your experiences with HOA overreach. Are you available for a visit to Austin? I laughed, not at them, at the absurdity of it all. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in my truck on construction sites. Now politicians wanted to hear from me. But I didn't go for the politics. I went for the ranchers. I went for the ones who didn't have dump trucks, who were still trying to find their way out of the corner. Wore clean jeans and a pressed shirt and stood in front of the subcommittee like I was just another man fixing his fence. And I told them what happened when power gets left unchecked. I didn't quote laws. I quoted silence. The kind that kills. Cows. The kind that steals peace. The kind Clarissa Davidson wore like a perfume. Sweet-smelling, poisonous, and impossible to ignore once it settles in your lungs. Afterward, the congressman shook my hand. Thank you for reminding us that real people live behind these policies. I nodded. You're welcome. Just make sure they get to keep living. Driving home that night, the road felt longer, but not heavier. Like something had shifted. Like I wasn't driving alone anymore. Clarissa was gone. Her house sold. Her HOA title stripped. The community she'd tried to manipulate was now organizing workshops on inclusivity and rural respect. They even asked if I'd lead one. I declined. Not because I was bitter, because I had cows to feed and peace to keep. The fight was important. But the life? That's the reason I fought in the first place. Victory doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means the attacks change shape, a different tone, a softer glove, but the same fist underneath. 6 months passed since the courtroom fell silent. The ranch was thriving. The pastures had healed. So had I, mostly. The Bessie Project had expanded into 3 more states. The dump truck, once a symbol of fury, now had a mural on the side, a painting of Bessie, head lifted proud, with the words, "Stand your ground." Kids loved it. Tourists came by just to take pictures, and me? I went back to living, mending fence posts, fixing tractor belts, waking up with the sunrise and going to bed with dirt under my fingernails and cattle feed in my boots. But peace. It never lasts forever. It came on a Tuesday. A knock at the door, just as I was hauling in a new sack of grain. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened it, expecting Betty, or maybe the Petersons. Instead, it was a man in a suit. Not cheap, not flashy. The kind of expensive that doesn't say it out loud. It just breathes power. He smiled without showing his teeth. Mr. Bennett? I am. My name's Carson. I represent a private firm that handles property acquisitions and investment partnerships. I'm here to talk to you about a very generous offer. The pause in my chest wasn't surprise. It was instinct. I opened the door wider. Talk. He stepped inside like he already owned the floor beneath his shoes. Walked straight to the window and looked out at the pasture. You've got something special here, Mr. Bennett. Land like this? Close to town, clean, with press coverage, a brand. It's prime. I waited. He turned back. We're prepared to offer you 3 times market value. Full buyout. You stay on as consultant if you want. But the property, we convert it. Agro-tourism, eco-lodges. A brand built on grit and nostalgia. I let that sit. Then I said what needed to be said. Who sent you? He smiled again. I work with several parties. I stepped forward. You mean Clarissa? His eyes didn't flinch, but his smile faded. I walked past him, opened the door. We're done here. Mr. Bennett, you can't buy what you didn't earn. He straightened his suit jacket. This land has potential. You've created a narrative, one that others want to be part of. Good, I said. Let 'em learn how to shovel cow shit. He left without slamming the door. Just a quiet click. But the tension it left behind was louder than any explosion. Clarissa wasn't gone. She was just behind glass now, watching, waiting, still trying to control the story, not with protests or signs, but with contracts and cash. Betty confirmed it. Later that night, standing on my porch with her arms crossed and her eyes sharper than ever. She's behind it, she said. New LLC popped up 2 months ago. Traces back to a shell company in Scottsdale. Her husband's name is buried in the board. Why now? I asked. Because she lost the last war, Betty said, and now she's trying to buy the ending. But I wasn't selling. Not now. Not ever. Still. The visit lit a fire I hadn't felt in months. I started checking the fence lines more often, kept an eye out for cars idling too long. Drone buzzes, distant clicks on the phone line. The peace was still here, but it was fragile now, like a window pane, waiting for a stone. 2 weeks passed. Then a new letter arrived. Zoning review from the county, requesting a meeting to evaluate land use changes surrounding my ranch. Something about upcoming development plans. Something about potential realignment of road access. I called Rachel, my lawyer. She sighed as soon as she read it. They're circling again. They can't shut me down. No, she said, but they can suffocate you in red tape. Make it impossible to expand. Make it harder to get permits. They can slow you down. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because that was the game. Clarissa knew I wouldn't sell, so now she was trying to choke the future out of me. Let me keep the past, sure. Let me keep the land and the cattle and the memory of the day I flattened her throne on wheels. But growth? Progress, that's where she'd aim her next war. Rachel leaned back in her chair. There's only one way to stop this from happening again. I raised an eyebrow. Turn this ranch into a protected legacy zone, historical, educational, community certified. It'll put up legal walls they can't bulldoze. What's the catch? She smiled. You have to let people in, officially. I exhaled. Hard. Letting people in had never been easy, especially after what happened. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. That night, I sat by the fence with a notebook. Something I hadn't done since Clarissa. First parked across my life, I started writing. Not a defense, not a speech, a plan. Workshops, tours, ranch heritage days, local produce stands, educational field trips, and one big annual event, Bessie's Day, a celebration of rural life, of honesty, of the quiet kind of strength that doesn't demand attention. It just endures. The county board loved the idea. Even the mayor called, said it restored his faith in public land use. Clarissa? She stayed quiet, but I could feel the fury in the silence. I'd turned her battlefield into a schoolhouse, turned her target into a monument. The official designation came in April. My ranch was now a community agricultural heritage site, a permanent protection clause locked into county code. It didn't just protect me, it told every other rancher in the region, you matter. Your story counts. And no one can bulldoze a legacy when the foundation is built from truth. Clarissa never sent another letter, never made another offer. But one afternoon in May, I saw her. She pulled up in a black SUV, tinted windows, parked across the street. Didn't get out. Didn't wave, just sat there, watching. A passenger seat full of brochures. One of them had my name on it. She left after 10 minutes. Drove off slow. No tires screeching. No theatrics. Just a quiet retreat. The kind that says, I lost. I never saw her again. But I know she saw what she needed to see. This land didn't belong to her dream, or her fear, or her story. It belonged to me, to the cattle, to Bessie's field, to every child who came out to learn how to bottle feed a calf or dig a proper irrigation ditch, to every rancher who used to whisper their fear and now spoke in full voice. It belonged to every person who realized that sometimes justice wears boots and carries feed before dawn. There's a moment every evening when the sun hits the pasture just right, low, golden, stretched across the grass like it's trying to hold the land in its arms one more time before night falls. That's the moment I wait for. Not because of the beauty, because of the silence that comes with it. Not the kind Clarissa once tried to weaponize. The real kind. Earned silence. The kind that means peace. Not absence of sound, but absence of fear. That silence is sacred. And every day I protect it. I sit on the porch, same coffee cup, same view. The dump truck rests by the barn, its steel scarred but proud. The sign above the gate still reads, Bessie's Field, Justice for the Gentle. Sometimes I see kids running through the grass, laughing. Sometimes it's tourists snapping pictures. Sometimes it's just cattle, moving slow and steady, unaware. They ever sparked a movement, but always. It's home, my home, not given, not inherited, fought for, and worth every bruise it took to keep. The town changed more than I expected. It wasn't just the county designation. It wasn't just the letters of support or the schools that now sent students twice a year. It was the way people looked at land differently. Neighbors who once feared the smell of hay now grew tomatoes. People started asking less about property, values, and more about roots. The HOA, what was left of it, eventually dissolved. Replaced by a community council, volunteers, rotating seats, no presidents, no queens. The mansion Clarissa once lived in, it sat empty for over a year. Then someone finally bought it, a nonprofit that helps foster kids age out of the system. They turned it into transitional housing. The community showed up to paint walls, haul in furniture, plant gardens. I helped install the fencing. That felt good. To take what had once been a symbol of control and turn it into shelter. Sometimes you win without destruction. Sometimes the real justice is transformation. Betty still visits every Tuesday, armed with lemon bars and sarcasm. We sit and talk about cattle, weather, and how she once thought about slashing Clarissa's tires before I beat her to it with 40 tons of steel. She jokes. But I know the rage was real. That's what injustice does to people. It makes you feel powerless until someone breaks the pattern. The dump truck gets a fresh coat of paint every year. Same blue, same message. People still stop to stare. Still take photos. Some leave thank you. Notes in the mailbox. Others bring stories, like the woman from Oklahoma who came all the way down just to say, "You helped me fight back when my HOA tried to ban my son's wheelchair ramp." Or the man from Colorado who whispered, "I didn't know it was okay to say no until I saw you do it." They come and go, leave behind dusty boot prints on my gravel, but they take something with them. Permission. Permission to push back. To stand firm. To own their story. And me? I just keep doing what I always meant to do. Raise cattle, fix fences, live honest, one day at a time. But every once in a while, late at night, I think about Clarissa. Not with hate, not even with bitterness. Just with clarity. She was never the first of her kind. She won't be the last. There will always be people who think power means control. That silence is compliance. That money buys the right to rewrite reality. But I learned something out here on this dirt. Something they never taught in any courtroom or meeting room or HOA handbook. Real power doesn't come from a title. It comes from standing in the middle of everything that's trying to crush you and not moving. It comes from knowing who you are when someone else is shouting that you don't belong. It comes from planting your boots in the soil and saying, "Not today, not this land, not this life." Bessie taught me that, with her silence, with her trust, with the way she laid there, scared and dying, while people who claimed to protect the community filmed her final breath like it was a documentary. I carry that moment with me forever. It broke something, but it built something too. Because she died, I didn't back down. Because she died, the dump truck rolled. Because she died, a man who never wanted attention became a reason other people stood up. There's a strange kind of redemption in that. She was gentle, and because of that, we were not. Not when it mattered. We stood, we roared, and the world listened. Maybe not all of it. Maybe not for long, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to change something. And maybe that's all any of us can ask for, that when the fight comes, and it will, that we choose to meet it not with cruelty, but with conviction, with the kind of strength that doesn't flinch, the kind that doesn't need revenge, only resolve, the kind that knows one truth above all else. Some people can be moved, others must be run over. One morning, I walked out and found something new at the gate, a small plaque, unlabeled, unclaimed, but carefully placed. Etched into it were just 6 words, because someone dared to hold the line. I stood there a long time, reading those words, not smiling, not crying, just breathing, because I knew what they meant, not just for me. For anyone who's ever felt like backing down wasn't surrender, it was survival. For anyone who stayed silent too long until it choked. Them. For anyone who's ever looked at a force bigger than themselves and chosen to be bigger anyway. That's what this ranch became. Not a battleground, not a legend, just a line, drawn hard and true in the dust, one that says, you can park your car here, you can bring your signs, you can file your claims and bribe your councilman and try to erase a life you never built. But if you do, you'd better be ready, because out here, we don't kneel, we don't yield, we don't run, we hold.